Anybody here this morning? You guys, okay. But anyway, so we're on our third homily about purgatory. So first one said, when you sin, there's two aspects of sin. There's the eternal punishment from God, which Jesus pays, but then there's a temporal punishment, which you have to pay. You have to balance the scale. Because we're capable of balancing it, we have to balance it ourselves. And that's why you have purgatory. And you can balance that by all your good works, prayers, fasting, giving to the poor, So whatever you do for God out of love is meritorious, and so it can balance that scale. And then the next thing is that there's a bunch of holy people, saints, and they saved more than they spent. Most of us are spending when we're sinning, sinning's like when you come back from Vegas and you're like, oh, and then you look at the bill and you're like, okay, credit card bill, all right, I got to pay this back. So the saints, they did a lot of good works, but didn't do very little evil. And so when they're done, they're your Uncle Louise, she died and she had $10 million in the bank. She's giving it to everybody, like, woohoo. So that's what indulgences are. You got the Pope, he's got the treasury, we call it a merit or whatever. And then he says, if you do certain things, indulgences, then I'll give you this, which will help balance your purgatory time. You can't buy heaven. That was always an illusion. You could just, indulgences bought you less purgatory time, as it were. And because money got there's conflict of interest in terms of money, they no longer get indulgences for giving to the money to the poor, for example. But anyway, that's what indulgences are. Indulgences are taking advantage of the fact that the saints have leftover. And God saying, I'm going to help you out if you do these certain good things. Now, so you could avoid purgatory altogether by just getting indulgences, right? You could play your odds if you're a betting person and say, all right, I'm going to wait to the very end, get a plenary indulgence, which the priest can give you on your deathbed. So if the priest comes and sees you on your deathbed and he gives you the apostolic pardon, remember that, people, apostolic pardon. Next time you're calling the priest for grandma, or could be the guy who's sitting next to you. Whoever it is, right, you're calling the priest for, then make sure you say, well, I want the apostolic pardon. Apostolic pardon. And that's a plenary indulgence. So you could skip all purgatory if you play your cards right. If you're a gambling person, right? But we don't want to gamble. Let's try to lower that. So you can lower it by doing indulgences. Now, indulgences, the church is smart. It just doesn't give you freebies. It says you got to do something good too. So if you say this prayer, which is good, say the rosary, that's good, then you get it. But you can be even better by giving that indulgence to the souls in purgatory. All right? So you say this prayer, which is it's a little good, but then you get like this indulgence, right? It's kind of like, I guess the Rockefellers used to do it, but you go on the street corner, right? And you lower the prices, and everybody comes to you, and then your competition goes out of business, right? But instead of doing that, God's not. Obviously we want to put the devil out of business, but imagine if you opened a convenience store, and the guy who owns Amazon or whatever, right? He wants you to succeed, so he starts giving out coupons, but he pays for it. Like, buy one donut, get free gas tank. Buy coffee, get free full tank of gas. Right? Everybody would be showing up, right? Because they want that bonus. Well, that's kind of what indulgences are, right? Rewarding good behavior, but excessively rewarding good behavior. But here's the thing. When you get an indulgence, you do something good, so you do help the world a little bit. So you are adding to the pile, right? But you still need to do prayer and fasting the hard way, like the saints did it, because that's adding to the pile, right? It's kind of, you think about it, like government programs, right? If everybody, if everybody was working hard. If everybody had a job and they're successful and they all made $1 million, and then there's a big tax rate, and they had all this excess money to take care of people, but there's no one to take care of, right? There's a balance, right? So there's definitely people that are just going to be the ones receiving help. So some people, they decide to convert the last moment of their life, and they take advantage of some indulgences, right? They really haven't added to the pile. They're kind of taking out, which is fine, because that's what the pile's for. But you also want people who add to the pile, right? Because there's some people that put more in than they took out, and therefore they're able to help other people. So it's still good to do penance, right? The old-fashioned way, like the saints did, and to do excess prayers, right? Instead of just aiming for the the annulment, right? Kind of like with the tax system. If everyone decides they're going to be on the receiving end of the social net, then the whole thing flips over, right? So if everybody just says, you know what, I'm not going to try too hard to earn, to make up to balance the scales through my own efforts, but I'm just going to rely upon getting these indulgences, right? So what I'm saying is it's still good to do penance, to make up for your sins. It's still good to say excess prayers, right? Instead of, I was a kid. I was scoring plenary indulgences every day. I used to ride my bike. Back then, you had to go to confession every week, I think, or every week and a half. If I was going to confession all the time, riding my bike over and things like that, which is good. But there's still that need to do the other things. But like I said, if you want to be the holiest, right? If you just want to make it to heaven, just like score those indulgences, okay, for yourself, which is fine. If you want to be generous, you can, and here's the thing, plenary indulgences, you can always give those to people in purgatory. The penances you do, you can give the benefit to somebody in purgatory. Instead of paying off your debt, you can pay somebody else's debt. Right? Kind of like, you could be the eternal codependent kind of person, right? Look at this guy. He's always praying for somebody else, He's always given all the benefit of his grace to somebody else instead of paying his own debt. But that's fine, because when you give something that could have lowered your purgatory time to somebody else and lower theirs, your soul increases out of charity for somebody else, right? Because that's what Jesus did. He suffered, and he didn't get any advantage from his suffering. He gave that advantage to everybody else. So you're more like Christ when you give the benefit of your suffering to somebody else, namely the souls in purgatory. And today, that's what we're doing, right? If you guys are here for yourself today, that's fine. You're always allowed to earn your own. But today we're here for the souls in purgatory specifically, but let's not make this the only time we're helping them out, but let's try to help them out on a regular basis.